So I'm really honored to be here with Gabor Maté, who's the renowned Hungarian-born Canadian physician expert on trauma, mental health, addiction, and a very, very powerful voice on the question of Palestinian freedom and of Israel, someone that I've actually never had a public conversation with, but I feel like in my head I have because I've been listening to you for many, many years. And like many, many others, I've been very affected by that. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And I've been following your work and your articles in the New York Times, and of course your online talks, and I've been really been appreciating them, and especially given the journey that you had to go through to come to your position.
Thank you. Well, I want to ask about yours. But I think the first thing that we decided we should maybe address as a common dynamic that I think both of us face, which is that both of us speak very critically of Israel, and both of us tend to get a larger platform for our criticisms of Israel than Palestinians do. Not because I think it's not false humility to say, not because of any particular merit, but because there's a privilege that Jews often have in this conversation. And I struggle with this a lot, actually, and I would love to hear how you think about this.
I think it's a very important point that the validation that we get because we're Jews, and in my case, as an infant, so having survived the Holocaust, this is supposed to give me some kind of authority to speak on this Israel-Palestine issue. Now, I was just in Auschwitz a couple of months ago for the first time. But imagine if Auschwitz was only validated if the Germans acknowledged that it happened. That what the Jews themselves had to say about it was kind of secondary or even questionable importance.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing. The Palestinians have been talking about their experience for decades and decades. Not that Jews haven't, but specifically the Palestinians have. But the Palestinian voices have been largely excluded from the circle of validation, you might say, until very, very recently. And even now, it's much more common to have non-Palestinians and specifically Jews on whichever side of the issue discussing the issue and giving credence, as opposed to how about the experience of the people that have actually undergone this decades-old tragedy and who've experienced it in their bones and in their blood and in their skin. So, like you, I'm somewhat uncomfortable by being given a special status to talk about this because I'm a Jew and therefore somehow my words mean something more.
Right. But then the question is, what is one? I mean, one answer would be just first not to speak as much, right? To say,
Right.
I'm going to step back. If I get invited to be on some media platform, I'm sure you do all the time, and to say, sorry, here are the emails of free Palestinians. Don't invite me, right? I mean, honestly, I often feel that that might be the more ethical, the more honorable thing to do. But then again, I also don't know if I say no, if they will invite a Palestinian, you know? So I'm not sure actually sometimes how to navigate this, to be honest.
I just think it's important to acknowledge it and to make the point whenever we can. I would never shrink personally, given this present horror,
Yeah.
would never shrink from any opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I think we have to keep making the point that there's a people here with
Yes.
their own history, with their own culture, with their own music, with their own poetry, with their own literature, with their own identity, and with their own words. Very articulate,
Yes.
poetic, very moving words.
Yes.
Look, Peter, we're talking today. We had the death of Anasar Sharif,
Yeah.
the journalist.
Yes.
His words, his goodbye to the world that he had to
Yes.
pen knowing that he'd be killed.
Yes.
One of the most beautiful words I've ever read, moving, poetic, deeply affecting. These people have words and they have eloquence. We
Right.
have to make the point that they must be heard.
Right. I wasn't going to ask you this question right now, but just because of you saying this, I can't help but ask something that I feel like your work as a doctor and as someone who studies the brain and trauma might understand in a way that I don't understand. Because I get asked all the time this question, and I ask myself this question: how do people, given what is happening in Gaza, given what happened to this man, this journalist who was killed and allegedly targeted, right, to be killed
Yeah.
as a journalist, how is it that so many people cannot be affected by this. Not only not be affected and be indifferent, but not be effective and very sincerely and passionately continue to advocate for things that get people like him killed.
Well, as to the question of not being affected, in my book, The Myth of Normal, I talk about how one of the ways that the abnormal is normalized in this culture is by making people indifferent and passive and caught up in their own personal concerns. And this is a tough world to live in, and people have many challenges, so that not paying attention to issues elsewhere or to the larger moral questions besetting our world, it's just part of their survival.
Right.
So that people are kind of shut down. Number one. Number two, the whole culture, whole industries are based on distracting people from what's important. I mean, whether or not Taylor Swift makes it or doesn't make it with a particular football player, Travis Kelsey, whatever his name is, from the that's a much more important issue to people than people dying in the Sudan or Myanmar or in Gaza.
Right.
That's the nature of the culture, is to distract people from what's important. That's one of the way that the culture maintains itself. So that's in general.
Yeah.
Specifically, when it comes to Israel, Palestine, and if we're talking about our fellow Jews, and I certainly went through my phase of Zionism, it's a powerful ideology, and it's an antidote to this sense of perennial and millennial Jewish suffering. It's hard to give it up because it's a kind of protection against a lot of humiliation and shame and a sense of danger. Number one. Number two, the way it worked for me, Zionism, wasn't just as an antidote to the terrible history of my own family or my people in general, but it was also something to really believe in. Now, people need to have some ideals. Many of us have a drive not just to put food on the table, but also to believe in something
Mm-hmm.
larger than we are. And Zionism, as any ideology, gives people that. And it's hard to give up ideologies. In the Myth of Normal, again, in the last chapter, I talk about being disillusioned. And I've had a number of disillusionments. One of them, I grew up as a nice little communist in Hungary. I grew up in Hungary till I was 12 years old. I believed in the system. Of course, my parents could not tell me otherwise. Otherwise, they'd get into deep trouble. And my teachers couldn't tell me. So when the Hungarian Revolution broke out in 1956, and I was just on the verge of bar mitzvah, almost 13 years of age, all of a sudden I realized that the system that I believed in and the Soviet army that had saved my life as an infant,
Mm-hmm.
actually an oppressive force.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a disillusionment. And
Yes.
then we come to North America. I believe in the American dream, and the United States is the shining city on the hill, democracy and liberty. And then the Vietnam War happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this great leader of the free world massacring millions of Asians and the press lying about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I go through that disillusionment. And then, meanwhile, become a Zionist, and the faith in the Jewish recrudescence, resurrection, really, in our ancient homeland, which is a whole other interesting story about how accurate is that history of expulsion and so on. That's a whole other issue. But what a wonderful antidote to a sense of being an outsider, having suffered anti-Semitism as a kid. And then one more disillusionment when I could no longer believe in the Soviet Union, for I thought, okay, maybe China is the answer. So there's Mao, and then the great cultural revolution happens and people are being tortured and killed in large numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a hard time accepting that because I so much want to believe in something.
Yes.
So what I'm talking here about is this need to, quite apart from any other consideration, this need to believe. And disillusionment, people say, oh, I got disillusioned. And my answer is, would you rather be illusioned or
Right.
disillusioned? So disillusionment is a good thing, but people have a hard time with it.
This has been a free preview of my conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest and support my work, please consider subscribing at peterbeinart.substack.com.